Good evening, y'all. Hope you've had a good week. Thank you for taking the time to tune into Medley's Minute. If this is your first time listening, my name is Stefan Medley. I'm running as an independent candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in Texas's 10th Congressional District. If you're wondering if you're in District 10, the easiest way to find out is to look up your address. Fortunately, this is an excellent example of a spaghetti district where it looks like someone just had a fistful of pasta and threw it at a map, traced it, and that's the district. It's The Jerry has in fact been mandated for this district. If you Google find your representative, house.gov has a little website. You just punch in your address, it'll tell you what district you're in. Should also be printed on your voter registration card, but if you don't know where that is, then Google is going to be your friend there. I would also encourage you to listen into my previous shows. They're on GCD Network's website. I have a direct link to the archive of previous shows on my website, stefanmedley.com, to hear more about why I'm running and why I'm doing this the hard way by not aligning with Republican or Democratic parties. Cliff Notes version is I do not vibe with what the current parties offer. Like a lot of things, great idea, poor execution. So I can't, in good conscience, affiliate. So I'm running independent, which has made things more difficult for me. We've got the primaries in less than a month here in Texas. It's right around the corner, March 5th. I'm going to be getting out, trying to get face-to-face interaction with the people of District 10 as I can. I'm going to need to get 500 signatures from District 10 constituents who did not vote in the primary election after the primaries are over, but before the end of June, in order for me to get on the ballot in November, because they have to make this as complicated as possible for people not affiliating with a party. So if you want to meet me face to face, I'll be at Coffee with Cops here in Lago Vista. That is on the 14th, I think 8:30 to 10. I'll try to be there more or less that whole time without detracting from the event that they're already doing. There's going to be a few other events here in Lago that I'm just trying to work out when and where I will be at those events. I'll have announcements for those on social media and on my website if I can manage to figure out a way to just have a rolling page of where I'm at, what times. But that's going to be coming up for the next month through the primary, pretty much until November at that point. But sticking with Lago this month, just because that's where I live. It's here, easy to get to. But if you live in District 10, you've got a event coming up in your town, in your city that you want to see me at, you think it'd be good for me to be at, reach out, let me know. I'm happy to drive around through this vast territory that is District 10. So yeah, reach out on campaign website. There's a contact form, social media, all that good stuff. As well, if you have questions or comments, that's going to be the place to do it, that contact form or the social media. I want to get to know you guys. I want to be a representative, and it's hard for me to represent you if I don't know you. So that's my thinking on that. Plus, your input on things is how I can fine-tune solutions. I might build a solution off of a misconception if you've got good information on it that I just don't know about, and I can use that to come up with a better solution, better idea. So that's kind of the gist for this, upcoming year, really. But the whole campaign from now until I stop trying, which won't be for a while. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of today's podcast, I know you are anxiously awaiting your appetizer dad joke. If this is your first time listening, I've started bookending each show with the worst dad jokes that I can find, just because the information's pretty heavy. I don't like being upset about things. I assume most people don't. So it's kind of a way to, lighten things going in and lighten things coming out. Makes it easier to palate. So without further ado, I was out to eat with my girlfriend this last week. Waiter walked up and goes, "Do you want a box for your leftovers?" I said, "No, but I'll arm wrestle you for them." So this past week, I've put a lot of thought into what I wanted to talk about today. The last couple shows, I kind of had that decision not necessarily made for me, but the thing that was making the news was immigration. So it was topical for that to be the subject of discussion. And that's kind of continued. I kind of said everything I wanted to say, I should say, about immigration with my current understandings of the issues with the last two shows. So I had no real direction going to this one. So I dug around, found out what the most important issues to the American people are right now, just off of news articles. I put together a roulette wheel and let that pick for me, and I built off of that. So today we're going to be going over energy and climate issues. So the overarching theme. Sticking with the usual format, start with information and then my take. It just makes my arguments easier to understand if you have the same information that I have. It's an easy way to do it. So currently, we as a country are getting about 43.9% of our power from natural gas, 17% from coal, 6.8 from wind, 6.2 from hydroelectric, 6.1 from solar, and 20% from nuclear. And I've ordered them in this way for a reason, but we'll get to that later. Let me also address the elephant in the room here. I do fully believe that we as humanity are detrimentally affecting our environment. I'm happy to discuss that in the future. That's not really the subject for today, but if you disagree, you have the right to. I want to talk to you about it. I want to hear your thoughts about it. I'm fine with disagreements. Let's just talk about them instead of silent seething. That's not productive. And regardless of where you stand, I think we can agree that wasteful practices, irresponsible handling of toxic chemicals, waste, what have you, that's not great. Regardless of where you stand on it, that's not ideal. I'm not very fond of plastic in my food or water, and I would imagine most people would share that opinion. Getting back to it, I'm going to start by kind of pointing out inadequacies, inefficiencies with our current power production, give my thoughts on some solutions where we can improve. Again, like with immigration, this is a huge subject. I'm not going to cover this in 30 minutes and it's going to be this perfect polished solution. It's going to be dynamic. We're going to learn more and that we're going to have to change solution from there. That's just how things go. Starting with solar. It's great if you've got otherwise empty dead space in an area. I'd be happy to put solar panels on my roof. Wouldn't be expecting, oh, I won't have a power bill if I do this, but why not? It's not like I'm using the roof for anything other than sitting up there and keeping the rain out. Hail, but for national scale power production, it's got some pretty serious issues. First, it needs sunlight. That's a given for solar. But that does mean that it's only producing power actively for about half of the year. That's kind of a problem. You can use battery banks of varying sizes to store power, but with battery tech where it is, that's not ideal. They take up a lot of room to store the amount of power you'd need to reliably keep your house going through the night, for example. And then with solar tech where it is, unless you've got some comically large roof, you're not going to recharge that through the next day while also running your house. So there's potential there, but where we're at with the tech right now, it's not a viable solution. Panels are more efficient these days than they have been in the past, but it's still not great. They're very, very space inefficient. For example, a 1 gigawatt farm would need about 45 to 75 square miles, depending on where in the country/world it is. Wind, a lot like solar, it needs a intermittent event to produce power. There's not constant wind anywhere. You might have a breeze, but a breeze isn't going to be enough to turn a turbine. So this gives it all of the same issues that solar has, different application, but same issues with the added issues of bird strikes and noise pollution. The noise has been a subject of debate for a long time. There's been studies that have been disproved and then reproved, and it's a whole back and forth. I can tell you from personal experience, it's obnoxious being in the vicinity of them for the hour that I'm driving by. I'm on the way to Corpus Christi. I would not want to live anywhere near them for any extended period of time. That noise would drive me insane. And then the bird strikes, they look like they're going pretty slow, and they're not, but the birds think the same things. It's like, oh, I got plenty of time to fly through here, and then they get bonked by this giant blade that's ripping around faster than they think it is. And over time, that causes damage to the turbines, which means they need to be replaced, which is expensive, and it's dropping birds left and right. I've seen designs and concepts for systems that get around this. On paper, I've not actually seen any in person being built anywhere, which tells me they're probably not efficient enough to replace the big windmills. Using that same 1 gigawatt metric that we use for the solar farm, your typical wind farm is going to need between 260 and 360 square miles. That is a huge amount of space for 1 gigawatt, which is a lot of power, but that 1 gigawatt figure is important for later. Geothermal, it's great, but we can't put it everywhere. We need somewhere geologically active for it, which means the places that we're going to have to put these are not geologically stable. They're going to be more prone to volcanic events, which is not predictable or controllable. It'll just rip apart the plant and then you got to build another one. It's just the nature of the beast. So they're much more prone to environmental hazards than other methods. Hydroelectric, the saving grace for geothermal is it doesn't take up a lot of room. Hydroelectric, kind of the same grand scheme. They don't take up a lot of room, but they're not great for the rivers that they get installed on. They're very detrimental to fish populations, which means they're detrimental to the populations of animals that eat the fish and blah, 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 so on and so forth. Not the best solution. Not the worst, but not the best. And less land footprint taken up in theory, but still not exactly small. So it is less intermittent than wind and solar, but it is still dependent on precipitation, which there's a fair amount of consistency with, but not enough to be like it's going to rain exactly this much every year, so we're going to get exactly this amount of power. It's not ideal. Onto our non-renewables, coal and natural gas. Coal has gotten way cleaner over the years. It's still far from perfect, but it has gotten cleaner. Credit where credit is due. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, I'll call it EIA, from here just for brevity, estimates that as of October 2022, coal power accounted for 20% of total U.S. energy-related CO2 emissions, and nearly 60% of total CO2 emissions from the power sector as a whole. Scrubbers and filters work, but they're not perfect. They don't get everything out. They get a lot of it out, and now you've got a heavily contaminated scrubber that you're going to have to figure out how to dispose of. So it's a stopgap. It works for now, but it's not perfect. Cleaning the coal is another thing that we've been doing for a while, and that's been about as helpful as the scrubbers. We're burning less things that aren't coal, which means we're throwing less crud into the air. So again, it works, but it can only do so much. Natural gas is way cleaner than coal, but still not exactly clean. Your CO2 and other airborne pollutants are fewer from natural gas than when you burn coal for power. It's about 34% of our annual energy-related CO2. But the EIA estimates that 33% of our total methane emissions, just whole country, comes from abandoned wells that are leaking into the air. This should upset you regardless of which side of the fence you're on, because if you're on one side of the fence, that's extra methane in the air. That's not good. If you're on the other side of the fence, that means they're leaving enough methane in these wells when they abandon them that it's measurably adding to our methane contributions to the atmosphere. So it's not good either way you look at it. It's ridiculous for both sides of the fence. Which brings us to our radioactive elephant in the room, shall we say, nuclear. So just getting it out of the way so you all know my stance on this. I am a huge proponent for nuclear power. It's cleaner than our other fossil fuels, It's not fossil fuel. It's cleaner than our fossil fuels, and it is far more space efficient for power output than any of the other renewable resources. Modern reactors are substantially safer than the often cited 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl that most opponents to nuclear will cite. And the Fukushima reactor shows just the level of act of God that is necessary for a modern nuclear power disaster. And compared to what 3 Mile could have been and what Chernobyl was, Fukushima was not bad, grand scheme of things. It wasn't good, but think about everything that went into that disaster, the earthquakes and tsunami, and then compare it to Chernobyl, which was just misuse, and then look at the damage of the two. That shows you where we're at with nuclear power now as a safe alternative. We also keep getting more, it seems like every other week I'll get a news alert. We keep getting more and more breakthroughs with fusion, which has even more promise for clean, powerful energy. I'm not going to say it's right around the corner. Nobody is really saying that truthfully, but it's closer than we thought it was. Part of the reason we have this bias against nuclear, a big part of it is just misrepresentation of statistics, and clever wording of news articles. There was an article that I read a while back. I wrote this down because I wanted to quote it directly. There's an article I read a while back talking about Texas's nuclear plants, which one paragraph reads, Texas draws just 10% of its power from nuclear plants, compared to 42% from the top source, natural gas, 24 from wind turbines, and 19 from solar, and 19 from coal and 4 from solar. The whole article was very, very anti-nuclear power, saying it was a conservative ploy to keep non-renewable energy relevant, stating that solar and wind plus better battery tech would squash out nuclear and fossil fuel power production in the near future. What the article fails to mention, though, that 10% power production that we get from our nuclear plants here in Texas is from 2 nuclear power stations. The other 90%, each one of those has 2 reactors, so 4 reactors if you want to break it down into the smallest units that make sense. So we have 4 reactors producing 10% of our power in Texas. We have 648 doing the other 90. And that's all of the others put together. But that's, 4, 698. That's basic math at that point. That would take up way less space. If nothing else, less space. And the disparity is even bigger on the national level. We have 54 nuclear plants providing 20% of the nation's power, compared to 12,484 plants of other types. I'm not suggesting we replace everything with nuclear. It'd be great if we could get our battery tech to the point where solar and wind was viable, and we could get the solar and wind to be productive enough that we could shrink it down, that the aforementioned issues would be non-starter conversation points. But we're not there, and we're still a good ways off of there. So I'm not saying we replace everything with nuclear, but if we start to transition to nuclear slowly, that's going to ease it. That's going to open up space for whatever, farmland. I know a guy who was being approached by a solar company to sell off his ranch because they wanted to put more panels. This was a productive cattle ranch. This had farmland as well, and they were trying to get rid of it to build solar panels. So we reduced the size of our solar farms. Now we've got more farmland. We've got more ranch land. We can sustain ourselves better in the agriculture industry. And this is just taking the space into consideration. Like I said, it's a big subject. There's a lot of layers to it, and this is just scraping the surface. But just the space savings, in my mind, make this worth it. Now, opponents to nuclear will typically bring up a few points, and there's a certain amount of validity with most, if not all of them. Cost, being the first one. Nuclear plants are very expensive. I'm not saying they're not. They're very expensive. Part of this, though, is from the difficulty we've had in improving our tech because people are so scared of nuclear. They don't want us to build new plants to research new technology to figure out, hey, is this going to work as well as we think it will? Because they see the word nuclear and they panic. Thank you, Cold War. So that has been a big part of preventing us from making it cheaper, courtesy of ill-informed opponents. There's also the economy of scale factor. As we build more plants, if we were to build more plants, they're going to get cheaper to build because now there's greater availability of components. It's part of the reason why, you go to a junkyard and you can get everything you need to repair your late 90s Camry. But if you've got I don't know my Mercedes models off the top of my head, but same model year, insert Mercedes here, you're going to have a harder time finding parts for that just because there were so many more Camrys. And that's one example of that. But the more something is made, the cheaper the parts for it are. So there's the economy of scale and then the prevention of development to bring the cost down. And cost is a valid concern here, but those are some reasons why I think it might not hold as much water as it's often presented as. Waste is, again, a fair argument. Nuclear waste is not good. Again, not denying that. However, and this was something I read a while back, I was not able to get accurate, I should say I was not able to find, I'm sure they're out there, but I was not able to find updated figures. But at one point, not too long ago, the fuel waste produced by every nuclear power plant that has ever existed could fit on one standard American football field, which is tiny in the grand scheme of things. You compare that to, coal plants or gas plants or oil plants in the same period of time, and it's immeasurably more than the football field's worth of nuclear waste. It's bad, but it's not much in the grand scheme of things, and it's easy to keep track of if you're properly funded. It's not like these other methods of power production that are pumping it into the air. You know, there's a joke where nuclear power is so scary because it spits out this radioactive waste. I prefer my pollutants in the air where I can't see them. And it's a joke, but it holds some weight, you know. So there is the waste issue. However, newer reactors are starting to be designed to use the waste product from older reactors. You know, it's not useless at that point. It's just useless for the reactor it came out of. There's still radioactivity. There's still potential for power, just not in the plant that it came out of. So we're designing reactors to basically recycle this fuel, and we could theoretically do this who knows how many times before it's completely depleted. And then at that point, it's not waste because it's depleted. So as we develop this tech further and further, we'll get better and better about recycling our waste until, you know, it's just spitting out a chunk of metal that's got no power to it. This actually segues quite well to the other point, which is weaponization. You know, theoretically, and with a great amount of cost and difficulty, you can weaponize the waste out of a reactor or the fuel going into a reactor into nuclear weapons, or, you know, tape it to a bomb, slightly simplifying there, but you pack it into a dirty bomb. And again, fair. That is a concern. That's part of why, I say it was Iran, we were having such a big argument with over their nuclear reactors, as there were concerns that they'd be importing this uranium and making weapons out of it. I might be thinking of the wrong country here, but I want to say it was Iran. It's a valid concern. It is a valid concern. But again, newer designs. This is just one example. We've started designing them to use some reactors to use thorium as the primary fuel instead of uranium. And thorium on itself cannot be turned into a weapons grade fissile material, at least not without incurring an obscene amount of expense, because it's not readily reactive. It needs there's a specific word for it that I'm now blanking on. It's not a tamper because that's for the bombs, but there's a booster effectively that'll be made out of the standard uranium, goes into a reactor, and that excites it. And that's how you get your power. You pull that booster and it shuts down. And the amount of uranium for that booster is small enough that you can't turn it into a weapon. And even with the thorium excited, it can't be turned into a weapon, not easily at least. So the common arguments against nuclear, there's valid argument in there. But if we don't develop the tech further, we don't have a way to get around it effectively. You know, if we don't have a way to, I mean, think of it like cars, like engines. You know, there were these calls in the 80s about we were going to run out of gas if we didn't stop burning it. And we still have gas today. And part of that was the engines got more efficient. We got better at using the gas we had, so the rate we were burning it went down. There were other factors at play, of course, but that was a big part of it. You know, you went from every vehicle being 10 miles to the gallon or under to, you know, my pickup truck gets almost 20 miles to the gallon. That's ridiculous compared to the cars of, well, even 10 years ago. Getting off track there a little bit, sorry, but there's valid arguments against it, but by putting more effort into developing the tech, we can counter these arguments effectively to the point where eventually, ideally, the arguments wouldn't hold water because we've already thought of it, we've already thought a way around it. And the last kind of big point on the viability of nuclear power, you know, I was mentioning the 1 gigawatt figure for solar and wind earlier. For a nuclear reactor, a typical nuclear reactor, to put out that same amount of power, it just needs 1.3 square miles. So that is 46 times smaller than a typical solar plant putting out the same amount of juice, and 238 times smaller than a wind plant doing the same. Will it cost more upfront? Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of a given with nuclear. But again, economy of scale, and if this were a federal program, which is what I would like it to be, since, you know, nuclear, we'd have the resources at hand to do a long-term cost analysis, see, you know, there's going to be an increase in cost here, and then it's going to taper down over the years so we can average it out, and the average person won't pay any more per kilowatt hour because we've already anticipated the cost savings over the next 20, 30, 50 years, whatever it ends up being. And then same deal with the actual upfront construction of the reactors. We look at what our long-term savings is going to be here, and we move this massive pool of federal budget around that we seem to be getting money from into ways that make sense. And part of that's going to be improving our energy infrastructure, saying like, hey, maybe let's not we'll take $150 billion out of this program and put it into nuclear research. Let's get these reactors built up. Let's get our cost of living down in the power department at least. So that's part of why it needs to be a federal program, is they have access to these metrics that we wouldn't otherwise have. I'm about out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, I did have another tangent that I was going to go off of that was related, but not strictly necessary for the argument. So I'll dog ear that, get to it another day. But that was a lot. So thank you again for sticking through. And as promised, your closing dad joke. As I handed my dad his 50th birthday card this last year, he looked me in the eye with tears in his own. He said, "One card would have been enough." Again, thank you so much for tuning in, spending a little bit of your Sunday evening with me. Again, my name is Stefan Medley. I'll be back, not this next Sunday, I'm out of town and off air, but be back February 25th, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central. Again, be sure to check out my website, the social medias. I'm fairly active on all of them. I'll be more active when people start asking me questions. So, yeah, and again, I didn't align with either party, so I'm going to need signatures. If you want to help out the campaign, reach out. I can let you know how you can help, and I'm happy to take all the help I can get. This is as grassroots as it gets. This is funded not by your PACs, your lobbyists. This is campaign contributions from you, the people, and my own blood, sweat, tears, and money. So every little bit helps as much as it can. And I will also be getting yard signs / road signs in the near future. If you want one of those and you live in District 10, fill out a contact form on the website. If you fill out that contact form, you say, "I want a yard sign," I will drive you the sign. I will hand deliver you that sign. So yeah, that's all I got for today. Thank you again for your time and support. This has been Medley's Minute, GCD Network. Stick around for Randolph's Corner up next. Good night. Y'all be kind.